Hello everyone, the quest is the quest, and I am here finally with my fourth Doctor review. As soon as I knew that I was going to be taking a break, a 2-week break at the end of November, I kind of had it in my mind that I really wanted to release this right before my break so that, my Doctor Who fans could maybe have another video, that they could watch during my break and just have a little extra content. So yeah, if you are not aware, I am taking a 2-week break after everything I released this week, starting on Sunday. So, it's just a little extra something for you guys. And before I get into this review and everything, definitely, if you would like to, leave a comment down below of your guesses of my top 5 favorite Fourth Doctor stories. I always end my reviews with that ranking, and then, towards the end of the video, you can see if you were right. All right, without further ado, let's go. I'm also going to do a little bit of a disclaimer before I get into all of this. Because this was a massive review for me, I have been working on this little by little over the course of a few months. Because of that, my notes for this review are right over here. This little area over here, and I do apologize. I will probably be looking down and reading a lot from those notes. A lot of times when I've done these reviews in the past, it's been like, I kind of go through everything and then I compile my notes and then it's all fresh in my mind. But because this took a while and also some not so great things happening in my personal life right now, I don't have it, as memorized as I normally do. So if you see me looking down a lot and reading a lot, I know that can be kind of off-putting, but I have to do it. I have to do it. There's a lot of, that I wrote out, and so I apologize for that, but hopefully it won't be like too weird or distracting or anything. Okay, so my goodness, right off the bat, I just want to say that it was really, really interesting. As I said, writing this review for the Fourth Doctor's era, and one of the reasons why is because of the fact that it is so long. I think I could be wrong with this, but I think my first Fourth Doctor reaction came out in like 2022, and it was a couple of years going through this whole journey. And because of that, there are certain stories that were super, super fresh in my mind, and then other stories that I had to really, refresh my memory with. A fun fact is that I actually wrote a good portion of this review in an airport with a really, really long layover, and it was just me with my laptop, just rewatching a bunch of, kind of very key moments within the Fourth Doctor's era. But what I find really interesting about that and the length of this era is that I feel like throughout his entire run as a Doctor, there were a lot of different vibes that we went through. I feel like there's a lot of mini eras within the Fourth Doctor's era. I always say a big appeal of Doctor Who is always the fact that every single person who watches Doctor Who, every single audience member can gravitate towards specific TARDIS teams, specific types of stories. Like, you never know what you're going to get. And I feel like that is very prevalent even within the Fourth Doctor's era. He has very different types of relationships with companions. with his various companions. He has very different types of stories. And, you know, maybe I know a lot of people obviously really gravitated towards the earlier side of his era, but there's also, you know, something very different and refreshing about other parts of his era as well. So it just felt really interesting to kind of compile all of this and put all of this together for this review specifically. I can see how Tom is so beloved and, you know, known as one of the favorite doctors in the fandom, and not just because he, you know, played the Doctor so well, which he did, but also just because it felt like us as the audience had a lot of time with him throughout different types of eras within his era. And, you know, as I said at the beginning of this video, I had to choose my top 5 favorite stories. And the vast amount of stories that I had to choose from, it was very overwhelming. I mean, I think my initial list was pretty long, and then I had to kind of narrow it down, and it was just quite an interesting experience just even reviewing everything for this review. So let's get into the Fourth Doctor, his personality, Tom's performance, and all of that. He definitely feels like the most alien of the Doctors so far. I think there's a subtlety to his performance as the Doctor that gives him an air of being kind of otherworldly, unique, and this feeling of you're not quite sure what he's going to do next. He's unconventional in so many ways of how he solves problems. And I think at times he's also unconventional in how he communicates with either characters in the story or even the companions that he travels with. I personally like when each Doctor isn't, you know, like a carbon copy of the previous Doctor. And I've said this so many times, and this is just a narrative in my head. Okay, this is not, you know, a confirmed thing at all. But I always think that the next Doctor is a response to the previous Doctor. And, you know, I felt like the third Doctor was very grounded. See what I did there? Because he was actually grounded. He was actually grounded. Anyway, he felt, though I definitely think that, you know, he definitely had tricks up his sleeve, and he had this definite unpredictability as the Doctor, but he felt more, you know, reliable and stable. And he was very, you know, I feel like, I guess just like a more grounded version of the Doctor. And the Fourth Doctor, I felt, was sort of a response to that in so many ways. I think he I had kind of like a unpredictable nature and whimsy to him that wasn't necessarily, you know, at the forefront of the third Doctor's Doctor. I do think it's a little bit weird to say that the Fourth Doctor seemed more alien than the third Doctor, but I think you probably know what I mean when I say that. And because of that, I definitely think that the moments that did showcase his humanity and did show a more like grounded version of himself, they really stood out. They really had such an impact because there was this sort of aloofness about him. He definitely had a certain excitement about traveling that I feel like was reined in by the Third Doctor's era for, I mean, obvious reasons, right? But the Doctor in general is always curious, of course, but 4 really seemed to be excited, going from adventure to adventure. There are moments I definitely felt almost as if he had 2's energy, a little bit. This sort of like childlike wonder, even though he is, just a very wise individual. There was just something about the pairing of all of that I found to be really wonderful and shined through Tom's performance specifically. I think the writing and the performance of Tom provided him with a great balance of, one, there was definitely these elements of warmth and compassion, but also these moments of kind of distance and seeming alien, and also just being really, really capable and strong. And I think Tom was able to weave all of those different facets of his personality together, which made him be a very versatile Doctor. As much as I think a lot of it was Tom's performance, for sure, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I think the writing also let him explore different parts of being the Doctor and give him sort of these moments to let different aspects of his personality to breathe. I think something that was really, really evident as I was going through the 4th Doctor's run. Yes, there was a vibe of him seeming a bit more alien than, maybe some previous Doctors. And there was like an unpredictability to that. And he served some chaotic energy at times. But there was a trust there. And I don't know that I'm going to say this in the way that I want to, but even though there was a little bit of this unknown energy with the 4th Doctor, we as the audience, we still trusted him to figure everything out. We kind of knew that there was, maybe not initially a plan to get through the story, but eventually he'd come up with one, you know what I mean? And so it was really interesting. And I think something that really stood out to me about the 4th Doctor was that there was this alien nature, but still comforting. And I think that that's a very, very difficult thing to pull off. And to have this, like I said, the slightly chaotic energy about him, but still feel, not super careless or dangerous. It felt more intriguing, and also, to provide this sense of comfort with the audience. And yes, some of that is just because the Doctor is an established hero in our eyes, but I think there's also elements of his performance that really, really brought that out. And within all of this, Tom Baker had a wonderful comedic presence. I actually feel like a lot of his comedic moments were some of my favorites throughout his time as the Doctor. And it felt a little bit different than previous Doctors' comedic, energy, if you will, because I felt like a lot of times his, more jokey lines, they kind of had a purpose to them, like a strategy to them. He wasn't, a lot of the times, I won't say this completely, but, being sassy just to be sassy. And let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. You know how I feel about one, You know how I feel about one. And sometimes you just gotta be sassy to be sassy, okay? And I live for that and I love that. But it felt very unique. I don't know, in comparison to some of the other doctors, you know, sort of comedic lines that were delivered in the past. And, you know, I really loved that. I know that a lot of times the big moments that are talked about with the Fourth Doctor are, you know, some very, very serious moments. As this review wraps up, not to give too many spoilers, a lot of the stories that I really gravitated towards were kind of more on the comedic side, I think, which is not true for every Doctor's era. I just think it just felt really, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure how to put it into words. Not great for a review, I know. But they were kind of these moments, and they can just be like one line where I felt like he really shined, you know. I really just wanted to put that as a part of my review because it was these moments, and that normally just one line delivery I think is so funny and just really, you know, hit that. Those were the moments that I really, really do remember when going back and, you know, going through all of these stories again. I think adding to that, I think, you know, there's been a lot of times where, you know, the Fourth Doctor has sort of maybe a silly or standoffish demeanor, you know, but I think what's really, really interesting is that he can really pull out that big goofy grin that we all love, right? And it still doesn't feel too silly or too naive. You know, he has these sort of, you know, joyful moments throughout his entire run that, you know, kind of really bring out a lighter side. And sometimes that is, you know, something that you can cling on to within some of these really heavy stories or darker stories, you know what I mean? So I think something that as I am, you know, going through this and as I was sort of trying to really look at certain things within his performance, I think one of the things that I believe is his strength, Tom's strength, is the nuance of it all. You know, being able to hit the comedic moments when you need it, to hit the serious moments when you need it. And I think he was very, very good at that. Now, getting more into the content of the Fourth Doctor's era, the first thing that I want to say is that I did definitely appreciate getting more fully immersed and back into the idea of the Doctor traveling and you had no idea where he was going to end up or what type of story you were going to be getting. Now, let me be clear, and you guys already know this. You already know this. Let me be clear. I loved the Third Doctor's era and a big chunk of that era being sort of grounded to Earth. We got to establish relationships with UNIT and everything like that. Absolutely love. You already know that I love. But it felt like a bit of a you know, a breath of fresh air. We're back to every single story, you know, being completely different. And you never know what you're gonna get and what vibe you're gonna get, what characters you're gonna see, what villains you might come across. There was something really, really great to getting like fully back into that throughout the entirety of the Fourth Doctor's era. And obviously there's this element of the unknown, of the unpredictability that I think really paired well with the Fourth Doctor specifically. And all of that being said, I genuinely did like, though, that the first story felt like a Third Doctor story. You know, it felt like it was definitely written for the Third Doctor. I don't know if it actually was or not, but it felt like it was. And what that did was give us a sense of familiarity, but also kind of a way for, you know, for and Tom to really showcase what his doctor might be about and what the differences might be there. I actually quite loved that, and I don't remember if people really liked that episode or that story or not, but for me, it felt a little comforting. You know, we're going to give you something that you're sort of familiar with coming off of the Third Doctor's era, but we're going to have, you know, this new doctor come in and kind of show you what he's about. Now, as you get into the type of stories and the content of the Fourth Doctor's era, absolutely, one of the most iconic types of stories that we got were these gothic horror-esque stories, which I loved. You know, especially as somebody in my Third Doctor review, I said my number one story was the demons. Like, I mean, it felt like it kind of continued on from that a little bit. And the very, you know, interesting takes on classic horror stories, a lot that we all are very, very familiar with, but kind of twisting them a little bit. And, you know, it gave a darker tone. And I'm not saying that Doctor Who's never been dark. Of course it has, previous to this. But there was something really wonderful about the setting and about actually making these stories have a pretty terrifying element. There was quite a few that I remember thinking like, oh my God, this is actually kind of scary, you know? And just the concepts within them being scary. Completely, you know, in addition to wonderful settings. And honestly, there's something, and I don't know that this is true about all of these sort of horror-esque stories with the Fourth Doctor. However, something that I did notice is that it felt like they went the subtle route in a lot of them with the special effects. And I liked that. A lot of times I feel like it's easier to instill fear or to garner up that feeling of, you know, just being kind of scared when there's a bit of the unknown. You're not really showing all your cards. And don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. You guys already know that I love a cheesy special effect in Doctor Who. I embrace it. I welcome it. Okay? Let's be clear. It's so funny. Sometimes I'll see these comments of like, I loved this story, but the special effects ruin it. Couldn't be me. Couldn't be me. I embrace it. I love that. But I do think it adds to this sort of really kind of scary nature of a lot of these stories, or that feeling that they're really trying to garner out of us and get out of us. When, you know, they were pretty subtle, the costume designs, the monster designs, all of that. You know, I really appreciate just all of the production value. And the writing's great. Performances are great too, right? But I really, really enjoyed that aspect of these types of stories as well. I think they did a really, really great job of immersing you into that. You know what I mean? These types of stories are absolutely one of my favorite parts of the Fourth Doctor's era. And, you know, I feel like it kind of paved the way for stories like Blink later on, or stories, you know, episodes that have come out in New Who that are a little bit more sort of an interesting take on like a classic horror story, or just something that's really trying to instill a lot of fear And I just thought that it was a bold direction to go with a very, very darker tone. And I think if it wasn't executed perfectly, it could have backfired a little bit. But most of these horror-esque stories really hit it out of the park. So I genuinely think that it was, as I said, a bold move, but a correct one. Now another really standout, I feel like time within the Fourth Doctor's era, and we're jumping ahead a bit, but was the Key of Time arc. And you guys know, I've said this, I think when I started watching Doctor Who, that I love whenever there's like an overarching arc to the season. And I didn't really think I was going to get that too much in Classic Who. It was not something that I was really expecting. Now, I know that I might be in the minority. I feel like a lot of you guys aren't like super fond of the arc. I'm not going to say everybody has very, very different opinions in this fandom, let's be real. But I definitely, and I think maybe part of that is that I think the resolution of it didn't, really hit the mark. And I get that. I get it. But for some reason, I had like just so much fun with just the fact that we had, this very specific arc that was tying all of these, stories together. I thought Romana I was a perfect companion for this particular arc. And I just think it really did all fit together really, really well for me. And I'm not sure if that's like a not common opinion, but it definitely was, as I was like thinking back at like different times or different aspects, and I'm going to get to each of the companions in a moment, but of the Fourth Doctor's era, it was one of the first things that came to my mind, being like, I really enjoyed that, And obviously we also had the E-Space, sort of a little tie-in of a few stories, which I thought, again, was just a really interesting way to tie together, I would say, stories that normally wouldn't fit together at all, especially Warrior's Gate. I mean, I don't know what Warrior's Gate does fit in with. I will say though, it did fill that very bizarre Twin Peaks shaped hole in my heart. So I gotta give it that. Now it is kind of hard to talk about the little mini eras within the Fourth Doctor's run without completely tying it to the companion he is with. And that's why I'm kind of sort of shifting over to the companion specifically. And what I mean by that is I feel like the Fourth Doctor had a very, different type of demeanor with each of his companions, just a different vibe with each of his companions. And that made it feel really fresh and new as his time went on as the Doctor. He had a really long stint as the Doctor, and if every companion sort of felt the same, and it felt like the same type of relationship, it probably would have gotten stale. And if, I'll get into it, but I feel like if you start off with Sarah Jane, and then you try to have somebody very similar to Sarah Jane, nobody's gonna like the person who comes after. No offense. But you know what I mean. I really did sort of kind of group certain parts of the Fourth Doctor's run with whoever his companion was at the time. Now I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. I think more during this era than any other era of Doctor Who, A lot of the comments were talking a lot about behind the scenes stuff. You know, who liked each other, who didn't like each other, who didn't get along, what stories people didn't get along in, or whatever. Now, I'm not privy to all of that. You guys tried to let me know, but it was too much to keep up with, in all honesty. Okay, so that's really not going to come into play with this review. I'm just going to talk about what I saw and what I liked and how I felt from each of these characters, but I'm not really going to get into the ins and the outs of the behind the scenes drama, okay? Because I just don't know it. And with this whole review, I wasn't going to dive into all of that as well, okay? So let's get into it. We are starting, obviously, with the dearly beloved Sarah Jane. So starting off with Sarah Jane, it's a really, really strong start, and I feel like her presence is absolutely undeniable in the universe of Doctor Who. As I said, the Fourth Doctor tends to have kind of a different demeanor with each of his companions. At least that's how I feel. And I felt like he had a very sympathetic and warm relationship with Sarah Jane specifically. You could tell that there was a lot of love there, you know, and it was really with her that this doctor, that, as I said, seems very alien, you know, where he had his most quote-unquote human moments. It felt like this sort of like them together was like a comforting bowl of soup or something. I mean, genuinely, it was just very, very lovely and warm to watch. That sounds like kind of weird, but you know, genuinely, that's kind of how I felt. Very comforting. To be honest, it's kind of difficult for me to talk about Sarah Jane specifically only within the Fourth Doctor's era in this review. I went in loving her, okay? I went in, you know, with, I feel like, knowledge of what I've seen her in before. You know, I watched her in New Who, I watched her in Sarah Jane Adventures, and so, you know, she kind of really didn't need to, there was no period of like, let me figure out how much I like her. It was like, hello, Sarah Jane, love you, can't wait to kind of go on this journey with you. And I think there's something, as I was watching it, specifically within the Fourth Doctor's era, that she has a charm and a kindness to her that is just so beautiful. It is so beautiful. And there's just something so very heartwarming about her character and about her connection with the Doctor, that it really just was beautiful to watch in every single story that she was in, you know, with the Third Doctor or the Fourth Doctor. You know, if I'm being honest, my favorite aspect of Sarah Jane's character has always been her more journalistic side, her kind of need to seek out the truth of a situation, you know, her, you know, desire to fix wrongs or fight injustice, you know, whenever it's, you know, within her power to do so. That's my favorite part of Sarah Jane, and will always be my favorite part of Sarah Jane's character. And do I wish that we got more of that in her Fourth Doctor run? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a little bit of that. I was sort of, if I had a want for another story to just kind of be like thrown in the mix when she was the companion, it would be something that would really showcase that and put that front and center of the story on display and have her have a moment to shine. I'm not saying she didn't shine as a companion. She literally is known as like the best companion in Doctor Who history, but that is something that I didn't know I was kind of yearning for until I lost her as a companion with, you know, in the Fourth Doctor's era. She had a kindness and confidence that I believe matched Tom Baker very well. And to be fair, I think that she's had great chemistry with every single doctor that she's come across, which is not easy. But another thing I wanted to really mention is the fact that I feel like whenever she gives some sort of snappy or witty remark, she does so without seeming very harsh. And I also think that that is a very, very difficult thing to pull off. So kudos to Liz for so many things, but also very specifically that I wanted to make a special note of that I always noticed, that she always, no matter what she was saying, there was a kindness behind all of it. And if I'm being completely honest, I think the greatest success of, you know, Sarah Jane as a companion is because she is so relatable to a lot of us. You know, I feel like there are times within these stories that she exhibits this strength and resilience, and it's wonderful to watch, but she also, at other times in other stories, has more vulnerable moments, which I think a lot of us could relate to. You know, there were certain things where, you know, in certain situations that we would be put in, that we could possibly really excel and, you know, show the, as I said, sort of like resilience of humanity. But there's also going to be moments that are going to be terrifying. There are also going to be moments where we're not sure. And I think, you know, that might be one of the reasons that she is such a strong companion for a lot of people. You think in your head, if I travel with the Doctor, you know, I might react very similarly in different situations like that. That's if you leave the TARDIS, which I wouldn't. But, you know, like I'm saying, like for you guys, if you're like, oh, if I was in this situation, I might react similarly. That's what I mean. Yeah. Now moving on to Harry. A lot of times when I talk about companions, I talk about their relationship with the Doctor and their chemistry with the Doctor, which I think that was there. But I think I more want to talk about his relationship and chemistry with Sarah Jane. I felt like there was a wonderful sort of witty banter between them, you know, and it felt lighthearted. Like I said, again, with when I was talking about Sarah Jane, it never really felt super mean-spirited or anything like that. And I guess when I think of Harry, I think of like, you know, he's a pretty intelligent guy and a very capable companion. And that's always nice. That's always great. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Okay? And we're going to get through this together. Okay? It's going to be rough to hear. But when I started, and I think that, well, when I started getting to the Harry episodes, there were a lot of comments, and I always take this stuff with a grain of salt. However, there were a lot of comments that were like, oh my goodness, this is my favorite TARDIS team. I love them so much. They're the best, they're the best, they're the best, they're the best, and all of that. There was a lot of that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I didn't necessarily, you know, it's very common for me to not necessarily agree with the masses in regards to Doctor Who. I mean, it's kind of my brand at this point. However, I didn't dislike Harry. I just felt like I never really got to really get to know him because I felt like he wasn't there as long as I expected him to be there given the response that I was getting. And I try my best all the time to really not pay attention to comments about, oh, this is my favorite character, this is this, or this is that. And I think this is kind of a special case with that, because there's nothing, I liked him fine. I just don't think he stuck around that long for him to have that lasting impression on me that it seems like he had on a good portion of you. Okay, so that's just me being completely honest about my experience with watching his character. Again, capable, great, but I don't think he stood out to me as many of the other companions of the Fourth Doctor's era has. So now we are going to get into talking about Leela. And I don't really know how things were within the fandom, but I did want to ask, how much do you think of an uphill battle she had coming right behind Sarah Jane? I'm genuinely curious if there was a lot of resistance to her as a companion, because of how beloved Sarah Jane truly was within the fandom and still is. I'm just genuinely curious about that. Now, as I said, Sarah Jane, I already loved her character. You know what I mean? I knew about her character going in. I already fell madly in love with her from New Who, Sarah Jane Adventures, and all of that. So she really sort of has an advantage going in, right? But if I'm being honest with myself, try not to lunge at the screen because you'll only hurt yourself or break your computer. But, if I'm being honest, with just their time in the Fourth Doctor's era, Leela's my girl. Leela is my girl. Oh my goodness. What a breath of fresh air for a companion, in my opinion. And I adored the dynamic between the Doctor and Leela. And I think kind of what I was saying before, when it comes to, a Doctor regenerating and getting a new Doctor. You don't really want the new Doctor to be almost exactly like the old Doctor, because it's going to take some time getting used to them, right? I remember way back when I loved 11 so much, still do. He's still the top Doctor for me. Nobody comes close. But you know who does? Who is second? 12. And so many people said, you're going to hate 12. He's nothing like 11. But I think if 12 was like 11, it would have been harder for me to really gravitate towards his Doctor. I feel very similarly here. Sarah Jane was wonderful. And Leela, in my opinion, was a great follow-up to that. It had a very different relationship with the Doctor. It was a very different vibe of how she was incorporated into stories. And I just absolutely adored her. She was such a strong character. Not just mentally, but also physically. And I would say, throughout our time of watching Doctor Who, a lot of the female companion strength comes from more emotional or mental strength. And I liked that Leela could just throw down if need be. Okay? I would say maybe tact wasn't one of her strong suits, but she could throw down, and it just added just a really, really interesting element. And I said this, and I don't remember what reaction it was, but I definitely said that Leela gives me Jamie vibes, and I still mean that to this day. I would love a story with Leela and Jamie. I don't know what the Doctor would not know what to do with that, but I would love it. And I do apologize for this part. I am just going to kind of read, because what I wrote about Leela, I wanted to kind of just get like word for word for you guys and not just to, sort of give the gist. And I wrote, I need to give the biggest shout out to Louise. She is beyond magnetic in the role for me, where this character can turn very one note very quickly. She has this insanely wonderful grit to her that is matched with something very likable for me. She did play the role to have a glimpse of a softer side, and I really, really loved that. I adored her loyalty to the Doctor. There was just something about how she was always ready and willing to do whatever, or fight whatever, in order to help him. You could tell loyalty is probably just a strong aspect of who she is, but also I think she really appreciated what the Doctor has done for her and her own growth as a person. Such a unique companion, in my opinion. I loved the idea that she can learn so much from the Doctor, but he could also learn a little bit from her as well. I love when companions have a great effect on the Doctor when they are traveling with him. And I think both Sarah Jane and Leela had a great impact on the Doctor in very, very different ways. I will say, I do think they could have done more with her arc as a companion and really stuck the landing with how her story ended. But I would adore to see Leela again in New Who and maybe give her a better closure for her arc. Okay, sorry. I didn't really want to do a ton of this video just reading exactly what I wrote, but as somebody who I feel like her character really made quite an impact on me, I wanted to get it word for word, okay? Now moving on to Romana I loved. Again, I felt like every single relationship that these companions had with the Doctor was very unique. And I loved the potential of the fact that she was more on par with the Doctor. I actually think they could have used that dynamic a little bit more within their stories, but it's okay. I really enjoyed, getting to know Romana, especially within this whole arc. I feel like, from what I've been told, and you guys can let me know, that a lot of people prefer Romana II. I love them both. I actually think that they're both absolutely amazing. I think if you forced me to choose, I would probably go with Romana I. I don't know. She serves a very analytical and almost cold nature, but it's I love it. I don't know how to, I know I was talking about how Sarah Jane exudes this warmth, but Romana I serves this icy cold, I know more than you, let's fucking go, and I live for it. I don't know why. And her outfits were so amazing, and there's something about her. There's a little X factor there that I absolutely loved. I do remember that there were quite a few people that said that she was a bit too smug of a character for them, but I don't know. If you got it, you got it, and if, she's got it. So I have no issues. What I did like is that there was a certain, she was clearly very intelligent, very educated and all of that. But the Doctor, while also very intelligent and educated and all of that, had more of I don't know how to put it, but more of a practical experience with a lot of his travels over the years and stuff like that, that I think had them kind of paired together really, really well. Now, I know that I wish I got more of that dynamic. I have to be completely honest, but I think it worked when they had these scenes together, that they could sort of play off each other with that element of everything. I really, really enjoyed her character. I thought she was lovely. Now, if we move on to Romana II, I think she still had that confidence about her, you know, that intelligence about her, right? But she also had a much more, let's say, welcoming presence than Romana I, which I didn't personally really need because I lived for the iciness of it all. However, I think it was a good way for her to take the base of this Romana personality and really make it her own and really, you know, sort of change certain aspects of the character, but not the core of it. And which is very Patrick of you, my dear. Very Patrick of you. That's a high compliment. Okay. I also think that she had like so many really strong moments where not only was she able to use her sort of quick thinking, but also use it in a way that was really able to help people. I think there was a certain compassion associated with Romana II that I think really made her stand out as a companion and made her very capable, very charming, but also insanely genuinely helpful, that I think was really, really wonderful. And I quite loved watching her sort of come into her own as her own version of Romana as the stories went on. Now, the one thing that I will say about Romana II is that I think her ending was a little rushed, which happens a lot in Classic Who. But I will say, like the kind of closure to her story, it felt very fitting for her character, which doesn't always happen. I mean, it doesn't. And so was her ending feeling a little bit out of nowhere and possibly a little bit rushed? Yes. Was it the worst companion exit of all time? Far from it. You know what I mean? Now, as we round out talking about the companions of the Fourth Doctor, obviously, we had a little bit of Adric, and we had a little bit of Nyssa, and a teeny little bit of Tegan. Though I think the Doctor had, you know, some great moments with Adric and Nyssa. I think mainly Adric, honestly. But, you know, I'm not going to really get into all of that and get into their roles as companions until I get to the Fifth Doctor's review. Because I like to sort of talk about the character, kind of their whole arc, and that's going to happen in the Fifth Doctor review. More so than this review. Okay, but now we're going to talk about the best companion in the Fourth Doctor era. Everybody, who? Sarah Jane? No. Leela? No. You all know who it is. You all know who it is. And that's the one, the only, K9. My absolute favorite. I adore him. He blows all of them out of the water. Literally my notes right over here say K9. Perfect, wonderful, iconic, no notes. So that's it. That's all I gotta say. You wanna know more about my love for K9? Go watch the reactions. It's a lot of squealing. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of that. But yes. You have to end on the best. And I did. So now, my loves, the time has come that we are going to talk about my top 5 favorite Fourth Doctor stories. I cannot tell you how many just missed the cut. There's a couple. And there's a couple that I felt awful for them to just miss the cut. But I tried to... I stared at that list for a long time, and I tried to really bring together what I thought were my, top 5 favorites. Obviously a disclaimer that I don't think I need to say, but let's do it anyway. These are my favorites. I'm not saying they're the most tried and true, best Doctor Who stories of all time. These are my favorites. Okay, it's my opinion. So let me have my opinion. Okay? Calm down over there. If you think the best story in all of Doctor Who is not in this top 5, well, I don't know, make your own channel. I don't know what to tell you. All right. Now, the number 5 spot. And this was the most difficult. The absolutely most difficult one to choose. Because I had quite a few. I think I narrowed it down to like 5 stories that were deserving, very deserving to be in this 5th spot. However, there was something that pulled it ahead of the others. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. This might take a little bit. I apologize for that, but I'm just going to read kind of my summaries of why I love these stories. So I apologize for the reading of it all. Okay. Number 5. State of Decay. I know. I don't think a lot of you were going to pick that. Let's talk about why. So what I have written is, I loved that there was a return to a horror-esque story that really made its mark throughout the 4th Doctor's run. I believe this story really benefited from everything just clicking. But for me, the atmosphere was really fantastic. I loved the setting, the music, the makeup, the costumes, and everything coming together practically. I thought the production here was really, really good. And it made for wonderful world building. The performances of the 3 vampires were just so great. I loved them. Their evil charisma is genuinely one of the main reasons this story beat out the others for this spot. And I genuinely loved the vampire Time Lord kind of like history thrown in there. I thought that was great. And I really felt as if this episode left me wanting more at the end. And speaking of the end, I liked that they went all out with finishing this story with a pretty gnarly and gruesome way. Like I think they really went in. They said, we're doing a darker tone today. They didn't shy away from the vibes of what the story was giving throughout, and I really, really appreciated that. Okay, for me, there's a side note to this story. When I was really looking at what was going to come into 5th place, and forgive me for just this little rant. Some of you watched my update video when I was talking about taking a break. And I was talking about some personal things in that update video. One of the things that I opened up about, and again, I'm going to be a little vague about it. I'm still in sort of the midst of all of this and dealing with all of this. So, when you're in it, you don't really want comments from people or, just a lot of, it's just hard to open up fully about it. However, this year I was diagnosed with OCD to the point where it was insanely crippling to me. And I can't tell you how, particularly the end of last year and the beginning of this year, was very, very difficult to film. I was having really, really bad anxiety. Close to every day. And it was even worse when I didn't know that it was OCD and I didn't know what was going on in my brain. But it was difficult. My time recording, particularly in the beginning of this year or the first half of this year, was not fun. It was hard. It's hard putting yourself on camera with all of that going on. And not just like mentally, but like physically, I felt the symptoms of anxiety a lot. And it would almost feel like I was dangling over a cliff. Like the feeling you would get if you were dangling over a cliff and it just won't go away. You know what I mean? And I particularly at that time really didn't want to talk about it too much because I knew a lot of the responses, in a very caring way, love you all, would have been like, well, just, you don't have to record if you're feeling bad, if you're feeling awful. But it was every day. So like if I don't record when I'm feeling like this, guess what? You're not getting any videos. You know what I mean? And I got pretty good at trying to contain that feeling, keep it just in the back of my head, and still enjoy whatever I was watching. But there was one day, the day, that I was watching this story specifically, State of Decay. It was one of the worst anxiety days I've ever had. And I didn't really feel it like when I started the reaction, but it just got worse and worse. And I don't know what was really triggering it. I kind of do now. I've been in therapy for it, but it just was awful. And you know what sucks about being a reactor and filming these things? You can't retake it. And after I stopped the reaction, and I tried to fully enjoy it, still immerse myself as much as possible. I stopped the reaction and I lost it. I broke down. I know this is going to sound very ridiculous to some of you, but because I thought it was weird because I really enjoyed the story, but I thought I was giving a terrible reaction because of how I was feeling, because of how anxious I was, because of what was going on with me personally during that time. And I felt awful about it. I felt like it was the worst thing I've ever done. You know, I was like, shit, this is terrible. And I had like, I was kind of worried about it going out, you know? I was like, this is the worst reaction I've ever done. I don't know why. I guess when you just feel that way, it's like hard to think that you're doing anything successfully. You know what I mean? And then the reaction went out. But the parts 1 and 2, and then the parts 3 and 4. And you all loved it. You all were absolutely wonderful in the comments. You know, you were, I don't think I got any like specifically strong compliments or anything, but it seemed like you all enjoyed the reactions. And I could not believe it. I should have, because really when I'm down, the Doctor Who fandom has a great way of picking me up. Most of you. And it was just so significant to me in a time in my life where I was dealing with something that I couldn't escape my own mind. And it was terrifying, and it was horrible, and it was all of those things. And this felt like a prime example of that. And I had to put it out there for you all to consume. And the response I got made me feel so comforted from all of you when I was going through this really difficult time. So that is why, given quite a few stories that were vying for that 5th spot, State of Decay takes the cake. All right, the rest of these descriptions of the top 5 stories are not going to be as emotional, don't worry. All right, going into number 4 is City of Death. Okay, so what I wrote is, I am definitely aware that for some reason the comedy stories hit hard for me during the 4th Doctor's era. I feel as if this story's comedic timing The cameo from John Cleese, Doesn't Hurt, was really perfect. Sometimes Doctor Who stories that rely a lot on comedy can sort of get lost in it. But I actually loved City of Death's plot. I thought it was really amazing as well, you know, in addition to these really great comedic moments. I love the splintering in time and the mystery, you know, with the Mona Lisa. And I loved the setting. I know some of the scenes kind of lingered around Paris, but I found it quite lovely to watch. It felt like this story started off like a beautiful vacation, and sometimes when you have so much time with a story, that's a nice way to go about starting it, I feel like. And truly, you know, a character saving the day with a big punch, it was just a perfect ending for me. You know, I feel like there's quite a few characters, one-off story characters, particularly in the Fourth Doctor's era, that had companion potential, and he's one of them. But there's quite a few. There's quite a few. I'm sure I can make a whole list about it. But, you know, I really, really had a lovely time watching City of Death. Moving on to number 3 is quite possibly the most iconic story in all of Classic Who. It's up there. If it's not the number 1 spot, it's up there. And that is Genesis of the Daleks. Okay. The thing that's really special about this one is I knew of this story. Not the contents of this story, but I knew the name prior to actually reacting to the story. And sometimes when something has quite a bold reputation like that, and I talked about this with a little bit of the hype around Harry, right? Or a lot of overhype associated with it, it can fall flat when you actually watch it. That's just how it goes sometimes. People sometimes build up expectations that frankly can't be matched. But this story really was something special, and that was obvious throughout, hype or not. I do think it's a really interesting way to explain the origins of the Daleks that is just completely laced in war and violence, and it just is very, very dark tone. You know, I talked a lot about like the dark tone of like the very horror stories, but this one felt very like dark in a very different way. And the introduction of Davros with this mad scientist air about him really built up the intense and dark nature of everything that's to come, and lends a perfect gateway to Tom's big scene. Obviously, this is one of the best scenes in his run as the Doctor. It is so well done, but for me, it's such a benchmark for who the Doctor is, has been, and will be. That scene felt like a stamp in the Doctor's life, really showcasing who he is and what he believes in. And what I love is, while that scene is significant, the rest of the story holds up around it. You know what I mean? The plot and pacing are great, along with the Doctor, Sarah Jane and Harry are wonderful too in this story. I do have 2 stories that I personally loved more than this. I think you guys know what the top 2 are. I feel like you know. Anyway, but I do think that this story was very well developed and strong, and probably the best example of how great Doctor Who can be. All right, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The top 2 stories are basically a 2-way tie. Okay? I think if you ask me on Monday, I will say this one is better, and then if you ask me on Wednesday, I'll say this one is better. They're both very similar into my reaction to said story, and I think you know what they are. But let's go into one of them being The Seeds of Doom. I mean, if you just look at the thumbnails of that story with me, I'm having a good time. I am having a grand time. So let's talk about it. First of all, before we even get into how iconic this story ended up being, I truly also loved the Antarctica stuff at the beginning of the story as well. When I think back about this story, it's not the first thing that I think of, but that setting to start off, had quite an unsettling vibe that I absolutely loved. I just felt like you really went on a roller coaster with this story, and it was a good roller coaster. It was wonderful. I think something that I loved about this story was the tone shifting fairly effortlessly from terrifying to camp throughout. I find so many characters, namely the villain, we all know, in this story, to be so engaging to watch. And I also think the Doctor and Sarah Jane really shine together and separate throughout this story. It felt like whoever was on the screen, I was fully enthralled, and it didn't feel like a six-parter to me. It went by very, very quickly. The pacing was great, and I feel like if you like over-the-top campiness, you got it. You like horror creature feature vibes? Here we go. Action with a little splashy unit. We're hitting all of the bases here. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like this story had everything that I wanted, and it just delivered. Truly, I love how everything blended together so well in this story. Now, obviously, the highlight of this story is no surprise, or shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. Harrison Chase is my favorite villain in classic Who history. He was the perfect mix of delightfully insane, ridiculously extra, and actually terrifying. Turning people into compost? I'm terrified. Vibing with all of your plants? I'm obsessed. Like, hating all of humanity because of how they treat plants. Like, I love. I cannot put into words how perfect of a character he is. I would like him to return in New Who. And you may say, Jess, that's impossible. You may say that. Okay? Nothing is impossible in the universe of the timey-wimey. We can figure it out. Okay? I do understand. I believe the actor has passed away. Rest in peace, King. Love you. So, I know nobody can match his presence, his performance. You're not touching that, right? But I would like to ask you who you would pick to play him in his inevitable, iconic return to Doctor Who. So leave your suggestions down below. Thank you so much. And the last story, tied in first place, I don't think it should be a surprise to any of you, is Horror of Fang Rock. Okay, I cannot tell you how much fun I had watching this story and Seeds of Doom. I like both of them. I knew before I even made the list that they would be top two because I had so much fun watching them. All right. Horror of Fang Rock is a good time, point blank period. And that's a really odd thing to say, given pretty much everyone dies. The horror stories slap in the Fourth Doctor's era, obviously, but this one was something truly special to me. I don't know how to express to all of you how much fun I had watching this story. Maybe it's because it came off a pretty stressful story in the fandom, but I love the dynamic between Leela and the Doctor here. I already talked about it, but I felt like this story was such a great example of how well they worked alongside each other, and I truly loved watching every second of it. I also think this story, this is the story where the brilliance of Leela's character really shines, and that's not just because I love this story so much. She's definitely ruthless as per usual, but she has other moments that give her a lot more depth than a lot of other stories showcased, right? I also loved how much this story instilled a claustrophobic, kind of really trapped, terrifying setting. It felt like everybody couldn't get out, and it felt like everybody was fucked. You know what I mean? And I mean, well, as I said, just this once, everybody dies. Like, you know, the doctor is going to figure something out, and like, you know that kind of as you're watching it, because that's how these stories go. But it wasn't looking great for a good portion of this story. Each character brought out a strong emotion from me, and I feel like that's just one of the things that really made this just so enjoyable to watch. You know, I loved them or I hated them. And this sounds really weird in relation to a Doctor Who story, but as a big fan of slasher flicks, I absolutely adored rooting for some people to live and survive, and then rooting for some people to die a lot, and to die horribly. You know what I mean? And as if all of this was, you know, wasn't perfect anyway. We ended the story with what? With what? A slow-moving villain. What else could you want? Really, what else could you want? Okay, I definitely wanted to end this review with a big thank you to all of you guys for your patience with me working on this review and getting this review out to you. As I said, it has been personally a very, very difficult year for me. And also, there's just a lot of material to review to compile this video. You know what I mean? But please let me know down below what your guesses were for my top 5 favorite stories, and if you were right in those guesses. Also let me know who you think should play a new version of Harrison Chase in New Who for his absolutely wonderful return. And always remember, while any character can possibly return in the world of Doctor Who, there is one that will never return. We will never see him again. And that is Ben. Because Ben is dead. Thank you for watching. Bye.